Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
But who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And what he do?
And he's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer. And today we are reacting to the Kimberly Potter case. Now, the Kimberly Potter case was a Brooklyn Center, Minnesota police officer. Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, I always get them confused. But anyway, she was a 26-year veteran of the force. She was a field training officer. On this particular day, she was driving with another officer who was in his second 4 weeks of training, who would happen to come from another department, and they pulled over Dante Wright. When they pulled over Dante Wright, they pulled him over for expired tabs. And then they also noticed a air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. You can't have one of those hanging from you shouldn't have anything hanging from the rearview mirror because it's an obstruction, and it's a bullshit reason, but it's what the cops use sometimes to give them a foray into other activity. And that's what they did in this case. So they pulled Dante Wright over. When they pulled him over, they went up to the car as they normally do, and they asked him for his license. He didn't have a license. So now you have expired tabs, obstruction in the windshield, no license. All right? And so but he gave them his information, and he also smelled a little odor of weed. Oh, now we have a little bit of weed in the car. Okay, so now we have expired tabs, we have a Christmas tree air freshener, we have no license, and then we see some shake from earlier. Okay, so now we have a little bit of weed smell, all kind of nothing stuff, all stuff that's not even a misdemeanor, really. But then they go back to the car after he writes it out and says who he is, and they find out that he's got a warrant. And I looked the warrant up, actually. And the warrant was for, in Minnesota, it's a gross misdemeanor to transport a firearm without a permit. I think, quite frankly, it's unconstitutional statute because Minnesota doesn't require you to have a permit to own a firearm. So how do you transport your weapon without, anyway, that's another story. So here's the deal. So now he's got a warrant. I looked this warrant up, and what happened was, they sent him a court date, but they sent it to the wrong address. So he probably didn't even know that he had a warrant, didn't know that he had a court date, and he didn't show up for the court date. So what happens when you don't show up for court? When you don't show up for court, they give you a warrant. So once the cops see that there's a weapons warrant, they pull him out of the car, and they're going to arrest him. And that's when all hell broke loose, shortly after that. Once they decide to arrest him, put your hands behind your back, that kind of thing, he gets back in the car, and he tries to take off. And Kimberly Potter is on one side of the vehicle. Officer Johnson and Officer Lucky were assisting, and she tells him, I'm going to tase you, like twice. And then he tries to put the car in gear, and she says, taser, taser, taser. And then the officers back away, and instead of grabbing her taser, which is on her left-hand side, she grabs her firearm, and she fires one shot into Dante Wright. So that's kind of the background that we're dealing with. Now, she's charged with 2 counts, manslaughter in the first degree. Now, manslaughter in the first degree in Minnesota is, in this case, it's called misdemeanor manslaughter. So causing the death of somebody while you're dealing with, while you're committing a misdemeanor. And in this case, it's the reckless handling of a firearm. That's the misdemeanor that we're talking about. And the prison time that we're looking at here is 86 months, but the state in this case, the prosecution, has asked for the ability to move for an upward departure over the guidelines. So and then she's also charged with manslaughter in the second degree. Manslaughter in the second degree is middle of the guidelines is 48 months, and that is where you cause somebody's death by culpable negligence. Now, we're going to dive into that stuff here in a second. But culpable negligence, I'll tell you what it is. It's whereby the defendant created an unreasonable risk and consciously took the chance to causing the death or great bodily harm. Now, there's a long definition about causation and superseding causes, and that's one of the things the defense has argued in this case, is that the superseding intervening cause here was Dante Wright taking off, that it wouldn't have happened but for that cause, and that he caused his own death. That's what the defense said in their closing argument. Now, legalistically speaking, I think they had to take that position. It has a bad taste in people's mouth, and I heard Reverend Al say today that it disrespected the family and it was a little tone deaf. But the defense has a job to do. So the defense has a couple different strategies here. Number one, that she didn't cause the situation. The situation was caused by Dante Wright fleeing, committing a felony. And they also have the defense that she did not consciously act. In fact, one of the things about manslaughter is that you have to have an awareness about what you're doing. And in manslaughter in the second degree, it's called culpable negligence. In other words, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to act in complete disregard. Can't be a mistake. It has to be like I'm drunk. I'm driving down the road. I know I'm drunk, and I don't give a shit. That's what culpable negligence. And then you run somebody over. That's culpable negligence. You have an awareness of what you're doing. You don't intend to cause anybody's death. They don't have to prove that. But the jury's out right now, and so we're waiting for that verdict. And so I thought I'd give you guys kind of a glimpse as to what is going through the jury's mind. What are they analyzing? Now, one of the defense experts was a doctor, Dr. Lawrence Miller. Dr. Lawrence Miller is a police psychologist, and his resume is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it's 3,000 miles long. He's the nation's expert in this area. And one of the things he talked about is kind of a weapon focus effect. So a weapon focus effect is where you've got, or a hyper focus effect is where you are looking, you got some stressor going on, and you kind of, everything tunes out, and you're focused on the thing right in front of you. For example, the weapon focus effect from the other side, let's say I'm a victim of a crime, right? Or a witness to a crime. And I'm looking at that weapon so intently that I miss everything else around me. That's a weapon focus effect. There is an experiment a psychologist did, and I want you to Google this, because when you Google it, you'll be phenomenally amazed by what happens. And I'm not going to tell you the outcome, but these people are lined up holding a basketball, and they hand the basketball, and you're supposed to count the number of times the basketball gets passed around to people. So I want you to Google psychologist basketball experiment, and then comment on what you see in that, because you'll see it twice, and you'll be amazed. And that's a demonstration of the weapon focus effect, or a hyper focus effect. Let's listen to what his testimony is on that issue, because I thought it was very interesting.
It's counterintuitive, because you think as the brain becomes more skilled, it would be use more energy, but it's just the opposite. As you become more skilled at a task, fewer parts of the brain have to chip in and contribute to that task. It's very...
So he said, as you get more trained, you get more automatic, basically, and the brain uses less energy. And things do become automatic. But listen to his testimony. I thought this was interesting.
To, again, the car example, the first time you learned to drive a car, it was all systems on deck. You had to think about it. You had to use your vision, your audition, your every sense to try to figure out how to work that machine. And what happened was, over time, it became so automatic that the driving program under ordinary circumstances is now overlearned and routine. And the brain no longer has to work as hard to perform these skilled activities as it did when you first learned it. And again, that's what the brain wants to do. It doesn't want to waste any energy. Just keep the simple things simple and save the really intensive brain power for the things that are unusual and more challenging.
So now this comes into play where you have a stressful situation that requires additional thought, but you're on automatic pilot basically. And a couple of different examples that he has given is, for example, a surgeon. A surgeon grabs the wrong instrument in the ER, or does something that they normally wouldn't do in the ER and makes a mistake. Or an airline pilot, under a very stressful situation, pushes the wrong lever and kills a bunch of people, and it's because of the stress.
Example in playing a musical instrument.
Well, that's another good example. I mean, if there are any musicians in the room today, they understand that the first couple of times you tried to play something, you wondered, how could anybody do this? Now, maybe a couple of years later in your practice, and it seems like what we call second nature. Well,
the other thing that they talked about was weapon confusion. And so one of the things you have to do in looking at this type of case is, in terms of what the jury is going to be going through, is, did she act with deliberation? Did she act with a consciousness and that made her appreciate what she was doing at the time? Now, we're not going to play the video of Kimberly Potter because, out of respect for Dante Wright's family, I think, they don't need to have this plastered anymore on and I'm more into the legal stuff anyway, not the sensationalistic killing of a young man. I mean, he did not need to die at this. But if you watch Kimberly Potter's reaction right afterwards, first of all, she shoots him once. Second of all, she goes down and sits on the ground, and she's beside herself with grief. She clearly, and here's the other thing. In 26 years of being a police officer, she's never fired her weapon. She discharged her taser maybe, and not discharged, but unholstered her taser maybe once. My guess is that she's a field training officer and has gone through a lot of training, but not somebody that practices a lot. That's my guess, because things weren't as automatic. And she talked about killing herself. They took her gun away from her, and she was. And you saw her. I don't know if you saw her testify, but when she testified, it was she was very much experiencing PTSD. That's what it looked like to me. So let's kind of go through a couple other things really quick, and I'll just show you some other highlights from the trial, just with regard to her testimony. Now, the prosecutor in this case, I don't know this prosecutor. I've never tried a case with this prosecutor. And so I thought she was gratuitous and mean. And she did some things I think she just didn't need to do. The two lawyers that are trying this case for the defense, Paul Eng and Earl Gray, are good friends of mine. I know them very personally. I'm a defense lawyer, so I have a little bit of a kind of in the fight kind of mentality a little bit about this case, in the sense that I look for defenses because that's my nature. But it's really sad that this guy died. He did not need to die. And is she responsible? No question in my mind. She's civilly responsible for sure. But whether she's criminally responsible, this is the kind of stuff that the jury's going to go after. So let's take a look at some of, we're not going to play it all, but we'll look at some highlights from Kimberly Potter's direct examination and cross.
Okay, Ms. Potter, on the screen we have Exhibit 13 at 2:01:48. I'm going to slowly advance the frames and then pause it periodically.
So the whole amount of time that this took, quite honestly, was I believe it was about 10 seconds between the time she says, "I'm going to tase you," and then she shoots him. And then the prosecutor, frame by frame by frame, and really slow, when in actuality it was in an instant. That was a big point that the defense made in their closing. However, I think it was effective for the state to do what they did.
Let's advance just a bit. Okay, stopping right there. At 2:01:48, do you see yourself here taking a piece of paper in your left hand?
Yes.
All right, now advancing to 2:01:49, please.
And he shot at, is it 2:01:49? He shot right around 2:02, so that about 11 seconds later is when he shot. It's really misleading to the jury, honestly, when you slow things down this slow. But it gives you a perspective, and it lets you overanalyze. Now, one of the things that the jury was instructed on is the perspective that you need to have isn't hindsight. It's the perspective of the officer in the situation at the time. So let's just talk about the law real quick, and then we'll go into the closings. So the first degree manslaughter. First, the defendant recklessly handled the use of a dangerous weapon. A person acts recklessly if the person acts in willful or wanton disregard of the safety of others. So that means that's not just that, it's not just that she grabbed the wrong gun, grabbed her firearm as opposed to her taser. It's willful or wanton. That is completely different. A person acts recklessly if the person acts in willful or wanton disregard of the safety of others. This means a conscious and intentional act, discharge of a gun, weapon, that the defendant knew or should have known created an unreasonable risk of harm or safety to others in the totality of the circumstances. Now, the prosecution is resting on that other part of the statute, the other part of the definition that says should have known. And should she have known? Probably. But was it willful and wanton? I don't think so. It's up, but it'll be up to the jury. And this is the kind of stuff that they've been deliberating for what, about 8 hours now. And I do have a bias to the defense in every case. That's just where my DNA lies. But one of the things she talked about in her closing argument is the defense taking you down a rabbit hole of misdeception and trying to tug at your heartstrings. Because, one of the things that the defense did is they brought some character witnesses, say what a lawful and truthful person she was, and a peaceful person, and no one's questioning that, and those witnesses are there to get you to allow you to know who she is as a person, but they, in saying that they're going to tug at your heartstrings. The prosecution does the exact same stuff in every case. They plaster nice photos of Dante Wright. They talk about, he won't be able to do this tomorrow. And it's effective. It is absolutely effective. Now, Earl Grey is he's been around a long, long time, and he's won a lot of cases. A very successful lawyer, very well thought of, but he's got his own style. I could not copy his style to save my life. He's a very successful, but he's a little like a bull in china shop, and he doesn't have a smooth political demeanor, in other words.
With a plastic shield in front of me. Before, this will be a first argument or summation, some people call it. And their argument that we might run you down a rabbit hole of misdirection. Rabbit hole of misdirection. That's what they said. playing the video not at the right speed where it showed chaos, playing it as slow as possible, showing photos. That's the rabbit hole of misdirection.
So the first thing he does, which I like, is he comments on the prosecutor just up front. This is why you shouldn't believe their message, and I think that's effective because it's like,
make no mistake about it, Kimberly, Potter, Johnson, Lucky, and Wright were fighting, struggling, and it was in seconds that happened, not slow motion. So when you go into that jury room, play it like it's supposed to be played, not a rabbit hole of misdirection.
so it'll be interesting to see how this case comes out. I'm not going to guess here on how it's going to come out because I don't know how it's going to come out. I think both sides have got good arguments. And it's really, this is one of these cases where there's no question as to what happened. Zero. There's no dispute that Kimberly Potter shot Dante Wright. No question. There's no dispute that he had a warrant. There's no dispute that they had probable cause to pull him over. There's no dispute about any of the facts, really. It's just the dispute is about what does it mean. And that's where a lot of these cases that go to trial, when you go to trial, they go to trial based upon, we all agree on what the facts are, we just don't agree as how the law is applied to those facts. And that's what you have with a jury. A jury will sit and listen to the facts, and they're a judge. They're a judge of the facts as they're applied to the law. And they're going to, so all the elements, the causation, superseding causation, all the different things that are related to this case, they'll sift through. And, you know, it's a big deal to do this as a jury because it's the one area of law or our government where the citizens have a direct impact on the government and the administration of the government and justice. And I don't know what's going to happen in this case. It'll be interesting to see. And my heart goes out to Kimberly Potter, but my heart also goes out to the Wright family. You know, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child or to lose a father. You know, my son is my world. I just can't imagine losing him. And so, you know, you saw the heartfelt pleas by the family when this happened, and you know their pain hasn't gone away, and it won't go away if she's convicted. You know, if they get a big settlement with Mr. Crump, I mean, won't go away. You know, I guarantee you that family would rather give everything back. Let's say they get $20 million or whatever. They would give everything back to have their son back. So this has been Bruce Rivers, criminal defense lawyer, Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Thank you for watching. Sign up for Instagram, Patreon, and we'll see you next time.